We are here to share our experiences and perspectives about the growing up and raising kids in Silicon Valley. Our hope is to help to improve our relationship with children or parents and learn from each other so we can bring the generations closer together. So first, I'm going to introduce three of us. My name is Cynthia Chen, and I'm a parent of two sons who happen to be here today. One is here, and one is in the audience. And I also serve as a school board member for 21 years. Today, this is my 17th year with Los Gatos Saratoga High School District, and I served 4 years prior to that. I also have been quite involved with the school and community-related activities, and my hope is I will serve as a bridge to bring all the different ethnic and cultural groups together, and together we can benefit our community. And next, I'm going to introduce Jonathan. Jonathan is a son of the first generation Chinese immigrants from Taiwan and was born, raised, and educated in the Bay Area. He has a bachelor's degree in electronic engineering from Stanford University and earned his PhD in bioengineering from UCSF. He now works at a healthcare startup company in San Francisco. He and his wife are now planning to raise their one-year-old daughter in the Bay Area. I think his wife and the one-year-old daughter is also here in the audience. Raise your hand. Yeah. And last but not least, we have Jing Chuan Shi. Jing Chuan is a Buddhist monk who currently resides in Berkeley Buddhist Monastery. After spending 20 years growing up and going to school in the Bay Area, he moved to the city of 10,000 Buddhas, which is a Buddhist community with K-12 education, which includes the schools and the kindergarten through 12th grade schools, and also a Buddhist university, as well as the monastery in Ukiah, California, to pursue his monastic aspirations. As an ABC, American-born Chinese, living in a Buddhist monastery, he tries to serve as a bridge between Asian and Western culture, as well as traditional and modern values. So I would like to share with you, actually, I saw both kids growing up ever since they were little. These two actually went to Saratoga High School together, not Saratoga, went to the school together, started from the kindergarten, all the way through elementary school, middle school, and then high school. And then they both went to Stanford University as roommates for 2 years, and
dorm mates for 4.
Lived
in the same dorm for 4 years.
Right. Yep. And still remain as good friends.
Yeah.
Big surprise, right? Living together, yeah.
And as a matter of fact, Jing Chuan Shi was the wedding officiator of Jonathan's wedding in April of 2010, before his becoming a novice monk trainee in June of 2010. So that was the last party Jing Chuan Shi ever So, would you like to add something, Ian?
So we were going to share a little bit about growing up together, kind of just to give you a flavor of what it was like growing up with the three of us, and of course other people as well. So we were thinking one story that was very maybe applicable was that my mom would often sign me up for many, many activities. I think that's one of these phenomenons of Asian parents here in the area. Every moment of their kids' lives, they try to have them do something, right? Piano lessons, math, abacus, Lego camp, basketball practice, swim team, what else? I mean, Boy Scouts. And so, so I'm pretty used to this. And my mom goes, I signed you up for something. I'm like, oh no, I don't want to go. You know? And then she would say, it's okay, I also signed Jonathan up too.
And I
That's
didn't
it, okay,
even know,
yeah, he doesn't-
actually, yeah.
And so we went, okay, so I said, okay, that's not so bad. At least I have somebody else that I could get along with and have fun with there. And so we spent quite a lot of time doing all sorts of things, from Lego stuff to Boy Scouts to, so we spent quite a lot of time together. And I remember that was some experience kind of doing all these different things, and I actually really appreciated, in the end, that opportunity to learn so many different things, and also having a friend to do it with when I went there. So that's one quick story. And the other quick story that I wanted to share about Jonathan particularly was something that I learned from watching him. And this is when we were in Boy Scouts together. I remember we were on a sailboat. And I think the Scoutmaster's name was Kurt. I believe his name started with a K. And we were on the sailboat, and he turned to Jonathan and asked him, do you know how to tack a sail? If people know what that means, that's, you're on a sailboat, and you have to catch the wind just right so the boat will move forward. And this is the first time we're on the boat, so I thought, gosh, I don't know what to do, what we're doing. And I remember Jonathan's response to him. He said, I can learn. That was his immediate response. And I heard him say that, and I said, wow, that's a really good response. That's just stuck with me. I remember through all these years, because I remember going, wow, I would have never said that. I would have just said, I don't know, sorry, find somebody else. Right? And he said that, and then the guy taught him. And I was like, wow, that's a really good attitude for life. And I think in that fact, I think Jonathan's life has been that way, really meeting situations in his life and always taking it in a very positive way. I think we have maybe a couple of friends here in the audience who we grew up together, and we always were quite struck by Jonathan's kind of willingness to learn and openness of heart. He was somebody that I think as a young man, I had a real fortunate opportunity to learn from.
So this is also giving some background to that story. I don't remember the specific instance, but I'm guessing I just wanted to do something, and I didn't want to say I didn't know how to do it, so that was probably the answer there. But yeah, actually, there is that aspect, which is that Jing Chunshi, like, we grew up together, and he was always like somebody I looked up to quite a bit, and Zhang Ai was always like signing us up for all kinds of activities, and I wouldn't be the person I am today, for better or for worse, if actually you weren't a big part of my life. So I did actually learn a lot from both of these people, and especially it was no accident that we chose Jing Chunshi to be our officiant at our wedding, because if nothing else, I think you have, of all the people I know, have the most eye on kind of like interpersonal relationships in a very thoughtful way, not necessarily just in a monastic way and everything, but actually ways that are relevant to me and that I've applied to our own family in many ways, and I found that very valuable. So I'm still learning, actually. So.
Yeah, I would like to add, since a lot of us, we are here, we don't have the same support as like when I was growing up, my grandmother always lived with us. And so here we have to kind of to extend our family circle. And what I always try to do with my two boys is I have them invite the kids back, and so I know who they are with, and then I become good friends with the parents. As a matter of fact, Mr. Shi and Mrs. Shi, are you here?
I believe so.
They are not here yet.
My
Okay.
parents are habitually late also.
Yeah.
Something that was passed down to me as well. Yeah.
So Mr. Xi actually became kind of a mentor to Jing Chuanshi. I think a lot of times, especially during the struggle when he was deciding to leave home, which wasn't what I have expected for him, because when I say leave home, that means becoming a Buddhist monk. I talked to Mr. Xi, Ming Xi. I said, Ming, you have to help me to talk him out of it, And so I think there were a lot of conversations, Jing Chuanshi and Mr. Xi talk, and I think both of you have learned from each other. And at the end, actually, I would love Mr. Xi to be here sometime, because he also has been a great mentor for my son, and I really appreciate what he has done for my son. And also I thank Jonathan for being his friends
Oh,
as he growing up.
Fortunately, he was my friend.
we had a lot of fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you guys had a lot of fun.
Actually, there's a joke. Actually, Jonathan was saying at one point, I think his father was quite nervous having me hang out with him. He said that he thought maybe we had a bad influence on Jonathan because I was too hyper as a kid. Yeah. he
That was
tell-
when he was little.
then Jonathan says, I don't know what happened to you.
Something became
a-
less hyper
Yeah, I
about
guess.
him now, right?
Yeah.
So actually, I don't know if you want to talk about how we were going to conduct
Yeah.
questions and
Yeah.
stuff.
Oh,
okay.
actually, because what we are going to do is we are going to continue our conversation here. And the thought I have is perhaps if you have any questions, I do have index card. Maria is there. She has index card, and when we have pens, if you don't have one with you, you can just write down your questions, and we'll collect all the questions, and later on, as I said earlier, we will try to answer them, but because we only have, not too much time today, with that email group list, hopefully we can, respond to you in the future if you are interested, okay? So, yeah.
Just one last comment, which is, obviously we're not experts in this area of quote unquote, raising kids or growing up. We have our own experiences. And so one of the intentions of this is not so much to say we're going to provide some answers, but really to start a discussion. To start a discussion on, I think, a very, very important topic here in this area where I think we're very focused on, the success of society, especially in Silicon Valley. This is where technology is basically created. Innovation happens right here. And with that innovation and that energy, sometimes we miss sometimes the roots of what we're doing. Our actual humanity is what it means to really be a person, what it really means to relate to one another. And so this discussion is just a start for that. It's not like, this is not a seminar where you come and you take notes and you learn some knowledge and you go home. Or this is actually something we hope you listen to and you reflect on. How does this apply to me? If you just come to this and just learn one thing that you can apply in your life with your children, or a child here can apply it to their parents, we're more than happy. Just learn one idea, and it could be very simple, like taking everything in my life as a learning opportunity. If you just learn that, if you just remember that one thing, that's more than enough. So I'll say that's the spirit, and over time, we will speak quite a lot. And I think my mom will speak more about what we'll do today, but I just want to make sure that's the spirit of what we're doing. It's not to provide answer, but to start a discussion. And the email list is there. I think the plan is just to have it go one way, so that we'll answer questions, we'll go down and be able to respond to things, so that, because there's a lot of strangers in the group, to not have everybody interact with one another if you don't know other people. But that gives a way that at least you'll get, I think we're a good balance, because I'm coming from a monastery, so I probably won't ever have children, right? Jonathan now has a 1-year-old child.
And making lots of mistakes.
Making one mistake. And my mother has actually, raised 2 kids. One's, working at Dropbox and living in San Francisco, I think in the Mission District, a pretty hip place. And one's in a Buddhist monastery, like, not very hip place.
Well, so next we are going to talk about differences between generations. As a first-generation immigrant coming to the United States, I noticed that there are a number of differences between the environment I grew up with and also what my children grew up with. So in order to understand each other better, could you please share your observations of the differences between the 2 generations? John,
Yeah,
I'll
so
start
I
with
can.
you.
Yeah, so I can start. So I think really, this is especially relevant within Silicon Valley because I can think of 3 main areas where there are some major differences. One of them is just universal, no matter whether you're an immigrant or not. There's the generational difference. For example, my child is going to grow up in a world where she doesn't know the sound of a modem, I guess. She's going to have very fast internet from the moment that she can use a computer. Social media is out there. I didn't grow up with that. That's something that in our world that I grew up in was very different from our parents. So that's different already. Then there's another one, which is actually many of our parents were immigrants. And there's something that comes in from being an immigrant parent versus a child that's born into America. I was born right around here, born and raised. My parents, though, came in to the country with nothing except their education. So even like when it comes to finding a career you're worried about like different things. Like we're worried about finding our passions. They were more worried about finding a job, right, and making sure it's there. Then there's actually the last one. I'm trying to remember now. I'm going to check my notes a little bit. Oh yeah, then there's the cultural difference. Yeah, because in a way we're growing up in the U.S. versus our parents are coming from like a Chinese, for the most part, like a Chinese culture. The best example I can think of this is actually that one of my friends from Beijing was telling me that none of his, and I met him during grad school, so he's a very good student, none of his friends knew how to play any sports. The reason for this was because in his community, you only played sports if you weren't good at school, right? Whereas over here, it's a lot different. It's a lot more about being well-rounded. In fact, actually, in elementary school, it's very not cool to be that good at school, right? So in which case, you need to be good at sports also, and that's something that actually my parents, I was fortunate, enrolled me in a lot of sports. And actually, I think she actually signed me up for a soccer league too. Yeah, so that was something that actually did help a lot. I was on school teams with, also managed to play all the way through high school, which is great. But that's a cultural difference there. Whereas like a lot of parents are thinking like, why are you playing sports? No, this is a hobby. Your thing is school, right? It's the difference in mentality. So there's both the generational, there is the immigrant versus non-immigrant, as well as the cultural differences. And so all this is sources of potential differences and conflicts.
So I was going to highlight a couple principles from the various generations. And what I wanted to try to explain is that I believe there's also deeper underlying values and principles that are true regardless of the culture. And I think that's something very important to see, because sometimes I'm just I think a reporter from the World Journal, was it a reporter from the World Journal? Yeah. And he was asking us about this question, particularly about how Western culture is very individualistic. I think people know that, hopefully. If you're here in America, you have that sense, right? American culture is fairly individualistic. And in Asian culture, oftentimes it's very community-minded. I mean, there's actually studies of Asians and Westerners, and something actually happens, and the Asian mind immediately looks to the relationships to the family and the community to say why that person did what they did. You know, somebody did something really horrible, so well, it's because the parents were like this, their friends were like this, or et cetera, et cetera. Well, in the West, it really highlights the individual characteristics of that person. This person had these qualities. They were reclusive. They were, such and such and such. And so just even how the mind pays attention to things, having grown up in the two different cultures, is different. So that's a phenomenon I think everybody's very aware of. And so what I see in that you could say that quote unquote cultural difference is that there's principles to both of them. So within the more community-minded values, we have a sense of, maybe I'll tell the story. A young boy, let's say, Jonathan and myself growing up, if we go to a friend's, like a mother's friend's house, an auntie's house, right, what's the highest praise that usually the friend's parents can give the kid? People, what do they say to the kid? 你的孩子很乖跟很听话. 你的孩子很听话. That's in English. It's your child's very obedient. Child's very obedient. This is if you were to tell a Western parent that, they would actually be offended. I hear actually a Western within the scout. I think he was in the Boy Scouts. He was one of the parents, and he came to talk to me, and he was really worried about his kid, saying, "My kid listens to me too much."
This is Caucasian.
A Caucasian parent, yeah. And I said, "Really? Okay. How old is your kid?" So he's 12 years old. I said, 12 years old and you're worried your kid listens to you too much. I said, well, in Asian culture, we don't really have that problem. And he said, well, I'm really worried he won't grow up to have his own independent thinking. He won't have his own independent thinking. Let me flip that around. I remember in college, I was very interested in this topic of relationship with parents. So I was interviewing my friends in college. And this is, I don't know, this is just one point of reference. I don't know if it's a really extreme case, probably is, but it's just so extreme that it really blew my mind. But it was a friend we went to college with, and his name was, I think, Jeff. He was the physics EE major. Oh, yeah. And I remember talking to him once, asking about his relationship with his parents. And he had his father, I think, was a physics professor, and he was at Stanford studying physics and EE. Very smart guy. And he had a really good relationship with his father. And he was having explained it to me, and finally he told me one thing that just blew me away. He said, okay, let me explain to you what I mean about my relationship with my father. If I had a girlfriend and my father told me to dump her, I would dump her immediately. And I told him, we don't come from the same planet. No way. I mean, whoa, that's so outside of the possibilities of a kid growing up in this culture. It's just like, what? If my parents don't like that person, even more will I want to be with that person, because that's defining who I am as a person in relationship to my parents who are, trying to live my life for me, right? So there's a whole different framing of what's going on. So this tension, I think, many parents are quite aware of, if your kid is about 13 years old, 14 years old, right? And I think to point out maybe a deeper principle to it is, so speaking about before, a word that we often hear is called xiaosuan, filiality. But this principle, I think, often gets understood in a way that doesn't do it justice. Sometimes it might just be seen as obedience. Whatever your parents say, you just do, right? That's oftentimes what filiality was. And that's when I was talking to the reporter a moment ago, I said, in fact, true filiality has built into it correcting your parents. He said, really? No way. Correcting your parents? I said, yeah, actually in the Xiaojing, in the Sutra on Filiality, Confucius actually tells one of his disciples, he says, if a king had a minister who would correct him, who would remonstrate with him, correct his fault, tell him when he's doing something wrong, then the kingdom won't go to ruin. And he said, if a general had a lieutenant who would remonstrate with him, correct him, then the war won't be lost. He said, if a father had a son who would correct him, then the family's name won't go to ruin. Right? So to me, when young people come to the monastery and want to talk about relationships with their parents, I would say, in fact, you have a very profound relationship and responsibility in the family. You can actually influence your family a great deal. There's a Chinese saying that says, one filial child can make a whole family peaceful. 一个孝子可以一个家庭和平, right? My Chinese is 马马虎虎, but the principle you can get, right? I have to translate it from English to Chinese. I'm sure it's much more eloquent in classical Chinese. But that's the principle, and it's really real. And I tell the kid, you can't actually yell at them, scream at them, swear at them, tell them they're wrong. That's not how you can do it. But you have to do it from a place of caring. If they actually see you care about them, that you put their priorities before your own, that you really wish for them to be better, and you ask them from a sincere heart, then maybe you can change them. But if you're just fighting with them, probably nothing will happen, right? So that's really where filiality comes from. It comes from a recognition of this deep relationship we have with our parents and other people, and seeing we actually say, recognize gratitude, having gratitude, recognize kindness, see the kindness, and then from that place of seeing the kindness, you respond with kindness, and you have the interaction. So it's not a pressure that gets forced upon you, it's like an oppression on your life. And so that's very important to explain to young people. So this principle, I think, goes much deeper if we really want to go looking into it, but that's where I say one place you can look. That if you really want to say what real traditional value is, I'll say you have to go to the roots of traditional value. And those roots are beyond culture. If you really go to the roots, you can't just go for the superficial, you could say, cultural habits. What people are generally doing on the superficial level. Like to be filial, you just listen to whatever I say. That's not going to pass, for sure in America. So I think what's one benefit being in America for Asian parents, in a way you could say from Confucian sense, is you actually have to reflect very deeply to be able to see really what you're doing to then teach your children. Because if you don't do that, you usually meet resistance. Because in America, we don't take any, we don't like hypocrisy. We basically, when something's this way, we look at it that way and we say that's what it is. We don't go, oh, okay, I just give你面子, I just give you face. We don't have that so much in our culture. So what forces, I think, in Asian culture is oftentimes just that superficial face value is to say you actually have to go even deeper in what's really in the heart. We really have to make our heart sincere. 要真正的诚心, or we have to really be sincere, and we can't trick ourselves or lie to ourselves about really what we're doing. So that's where the real source. If we can be that honest with ourselves, we can be that honest with our children, then I would say the children will really pay attention, and then they will follow. But if we're not telling our truth to ourselves, we're just going through the habits of society, just trying to be successful in the way that I'm getting from all the feedbacks around me. The kids see that and go, that's not what I want. I want to go somewhere else. Then there's that loss.
Yeah, I would just like to add a couple points to this topic as well. I grew up in a country that we have entrance exam. I think those of you came from Taiwan or China or Japan, you can relate to that. At the end of 6th grade, at the end of the 9th grade, we have entrance exam, and it's 1 day or 2 days test that if you did not do well, you just have to come back next year. So that's why I think for a lot of parents, coming from that background, it's kind of like you only have one chance, like one opportunity in order to become successful in your academic study. Whereas here, actually, you have many, many opportunities. I think that's one thing I think as a parent, we can try to learn, because here, if the kids are going to, if they did not get into a good university, they can go to a good, go to a community college and they get transferred over, and there are just many, many more opportunities. Another point I try to add is, I think Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism have a lot of influence on the Asian culture or Chinese culture, whereas Christianity here actually influenced Western cultures a lot. As a matter of fact, when I was this was in my 12th grade, I think last year in my high school, our Chinese literature text was the Confucius Analects, and we had to memorize a lot of quotes. And I didn't really care for that so much. But then one day, when I think this was when Jing Chuanshi and my other son were probably in the elementary school and high school, I found myself quoting those quotes, I say, 己所不欲，勿施于人, don't do to others what you don't want others to do to you. And also there's like, 三人行必有我师, 择其善者而从之, 择其不善者而改之. Like when you walk with 2 other persons, you learn from the person with the right behavior, and you learn from the person with bad behavior, that you try not to make the same mistakes as that person. So I think it's, in a way, I think the culture actually rests deeply in our background. And I also remember, I think some of you might remember, when we were in high school, we have 公民课, citizenship class. So I brought it up when I was on my school board. I think when I went to my high school board, this was 16 years ago. When we had a discussion, and I said, I think in our school curriculum, we should add, perhaps not too much, but something about like the moral standards, something similar to, I think, for that citizenship class I had in mind. But the response I got from was, it's not for here. The value rests in the family. Because in United States, again, the individualism comes into play, that each family has its own value. So we do not want to impose the value over the kids, which the parents might not agree. But the problem is, I think later on, we're going to get into it. I think probably when you are in middle school or high school, somehow you kind of stop communicating the value with the kids. So in a way, I think the kids nowadays, I really feel for the kids growing up in this at this time, because I think when we were growing up, it was much more stable, And nowadays, it's getting difficult because they have things coming all over the places. And there's no hero anymore because you can find someone who you thought was a hero, but then you will find there's fault in the person. For sure, we are all not perfect, but I think for the kids, sometimes it's hard to accept. So
I want to do a process thing because I see a lot of people standing in the back. So this is a time to practice virtue. I see a lot of young people, a couple young people. So what I would really suggest is letting some of the more elders sit. And actually, you could sit right in front here. I would really recommend if you're young, like Darren, I know you're younger. So come sit in front. You can sit on the floor. I'm sure you guys like sitting on the floor. Please come in the front, sit on the floor.
So if you want
give
to
a spot to some of the people. Please come. We're not gonna bite. We're not gonna do anything. So yeah, please come sit in the front.
Stay away
I
from
think we're
Jonathan.
just having. Yeah. So you come sit right in the front. We won't embarrass you.
I'm my mom.
Yeah. I don't know if Griffin is still in the back where he
So
wants
you
to
guys
come.
can sit over here.
Yeah. You guys come sit in front. Steve, you guys sit in front.
Steve actually grew up with this too.
Yeah. You can probably sit right here too if you want to. Say something.
You're not that young anymore.
Yeah, that young too.
So actually, yeah, another one of our friends that we grew up with, who also is a father now, is here today.
Yeah, he's.
That's great.
Griffin, you want to come sit in the front?
Oh, maybe one.
Alan?
Because, okay, yeah. Okay, so, but yeah, if people can give I think there might be, maybe Steve, if you look inside, there might be 2 or 3 more chairs inside, just to take out for
Okay.
people. Okay, so I just want to make sure that people find a place to sit. Or if you want to come sit, if you're older and you also like to sit on the floor in front, you're more than welcome to, you know, depending. There's one more chair in the front here, if anybody wants to take a front chair in the front.
If sitting on the front will make you feel younger,
Yeah.
be our guest.
No, please. We're trying to be a little bit more informal. It's not.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's two more chairs here. So please come, don't be embarrassed. I see an elder gentleman here. 要不要坐在这边？这边还有2个位置，如果需要。
要不要坐这儿？
Yeah. So anybody who's interested, please come. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
So next we are going to talk about bringing the generations together. Given the differences between the 2 generations, could either of you share some of the tips or ideas regarding how to bring the generations closer together?
And I think a lot of this will help. We're thinking about putting a framework on this because I know that we've been talking in principles about like roots and like cultural differences. I think one of the things that was very helpful for me personally was talking to both Zhang Ai and Jing Chunshi about what to expect in a way. Because in a way, there's like, no matter where kids are born, there's certain phases that everyone goes through. Like, I don't know a single country or culture that says, oh, teenagers are very, easy to deal with. They're just very obedient, right? It seems pretty universal that something happens around the teenager years, right? And so actually, Jing Chunshi, I think, was going to talk about like some of the stages of like parental-kid relationships that very universally happen.
Okay, so we thought this would be a valuable framework for parents to have a sense of. We just talked with another father who has a child who's 19 years old, and I think when parents have a teenage kid, oftentimes, especially if they're first generation, there's often a feeling like, what's going on with me and my kid, right? And I often tell the parent, okay, don't worry, there's different phases. If you have a good relationship, you build a good relationship in the past, oftentimes there's a returning. There's a coming back later on, at, let's say, 25. And oftentimes it's because they actually have a very scary experience, the kids. They go, I'm going out in society, I'm starting to get a job, I'm starting to maybe get married and get a relationship. And how I deal with problems is just like how my dad deals with problems. This is scary. And when they kind of have that thought in the mind, all of a sudden there's a new relationship with their parent develops, right? Before it was I'm defining who I am, all of a sudden realize, wait a moment, what's going on? The things I said I would never do, I'm doing, right? And so that's just like the dad, just like the mom, either you can take either parent. And so I thought having this sense of the framework would give people a feeling, okay, this is the process where a kid potentially goes through. And of course, every child is different, so you can see and reflect on your own children if you have children. But basically, we were thinking that, so we were just sharing together that probably under 6 years old, the kid's more or less like a sponge. anything you say, they just take in. And I had a funny story that they thought I would share, and this relates to my younger brother. I'm sorry, he has to, because we grew up together. And I remember one time, I'm about 6.5 years older than my brother. He was about 5 years old, and we were sitting at the dinner table, and I leaned over to him and whispered in his ear, I said, "Darren, I stole all of your power. You're going to die." Okay, and he heard that. And all of a sudden, he started crying and he's screaming. I was like, "Whoa, what happened?" And he's like, "I'm gonna die." And my mom runs into the room, storming into the room. He says, "What did you do, David? What did you do to him?" I said, "I didn't touch him." And I go, "Okay, this is what's going on." He's like, I lean over to him, "Darren, I gave back all your power. You'll be fine. You'll be fine." And he immediately stopped crying. And I was like, whoa, that was really weird. That he really believed what I said, like 100% at that age. And I thought, okay, that's pretty amazing. But to me, that's a pretty telling thing about what it means to be at that age, is that you're really absorbing everything that's coming in without too much of a filter. So at that age, what are parents giving exposure to their kids, right, at that age? And I think many parents are very aware that that's a very important time. So that's one stage, 0 to 6. So then the next stage is probably around 6 to 12. And this is oftentimes like elementary school. And if parents were with me, and I would say, that's the time really to spend a lot of time with your children and share your lives with them. And I say, why? It's because at 13, they no longer want to spend time with you. They don't want to listen to you. So if you don't talk to them before that chance, it's going to be really hard to talk to them afterwards. So if you can develop that relationship beforehand and have that really strong relationship, then when they turn 13, they'll actually have that relationship to build from and grow from, rather than just not ever knowing who you are and just reacting to who they project you to be. But if that from 6 to 12, you share your life with them. And that's what I said in the beginning about this kind of inner honesty. If you're honest about really who you are with your kids through this process, then they will relate to you as a human being. Because what happens at 13, oftentimes, is basically, our parents before that are kind of like our role models and our heroes. We look up to them. But at 13, 14, all of a sudden, another perspective turns in, and we start really being very critical at our parents. We see all their flaws. We see how they're hypocrites. We see how they're not living up to the values that they themselves espouse, that they say that we want us to do. They're not doing it, so how can they expect me to do it, right? So at that point, the mind is really different. And if you haven't developed a real honest, true relationship with them, then it's very hard to build something from there. So my recommendation is before they turn 13, if you can spend really a lot of time with them, really share your lives with them in a really honest way, tell your stories about your life. When you were a kid growing up, when you were 6 years old, what were you like? When you were 12 years old, what were you like? Share those stories, right? Develop that relationship. Then when the 13 comes around, it's, the rebellion probably will occur, especially having grown up in American culture, but it won't be so much that it's completely ungrounded. They'll be reacting to something real that they've heard you talk about as a parent, talking about yourself as a young person. You're not looking for them just to listen to you. What you want to develop them is an independent thinking in their own process, because that's what they're going to use for the rest of their lives. All right.
Yeah, I would like to add one example that probably a lot of parents can relate to. Again, Darren, that was you. I remember, I think this was when he was in high school. So I want to find out what's going on during the day, right? So I asked him, I say, Darren, what did you do at school today? He said, going to classes. And then I said, who did you have lunch with? Friends. And so I think the goal is trying to keep the conversation as short as possible, and then I would be off his back. And one strategy I employed was, back then we were still subscribing to Mercury News, the paper copy. So like every morning, like if I read a Mercury News and I saw some interesting article, I would use that as our starting point. Like, I would say, this is what I read today. I'll kind of leave it on on the table, and then we have a conversation. And I think one thing, even without the Murphy news nowadays, like say what happened in Paris recently, the shooting, I think for sure it's going to, we can have a very good conversation, not just looking at the facts, people got killed, but if you can try to look into more of the roots, the history of, what's causing to this incident. And then this morning I saw like the revenge from France, so again, one after another, if you keep on revenging each other, where it's going to lead to. So I think that's one thing I would like to share with the audience. And maybe Jonathan want to add something?
Well, I mean, definitely this is something, and we're talking about like the kind of 6 to 12 age period, then 13 to 18, there's like a transition that happens there. I can tell, like, I know 2 examples that perfectly illustrate that happening. As we saw, I idolized my parents growing up around 6 to 12. And what would happen is that my dad would tell me stories about how he was a really mischievous child in Taiwan in school. What he would do is, like, when the teacher was writing at the board, would run around the classroom when the one looking, and they would turn around, and then he would just be back in his seat, and all the kids would be laughing. And I thought that was the greatest thing ever. And like, I think he just meant that maybe as a cautionary tale. I'm not sure. He got punished a lot as a kid. But I did it in my own classroom. But the classrooms, I think, were bigger. So I was only halfway around the classroom before the teacher turned around. And it was just looking at me, what are you doing way in the back there? Right? But that's the kind of attitude that you have as, like, I was about 8 at the time. I thought, oh, I want to be like my dad. And then in contrast, what happens is, like, when I was working on college school applications, at one point I was thinking, oh, why am I going to college? Just to become like my dad who works all day and just like really, like, is he really a happy guy? So I went to talk to him. I was like, Dad, I don't know if I want to go to college. Really, am I just going to become like you? Is that it? And then my dad, being the open-minded guy he was saying, that's a good point. I don't know. Do you really have to go to college? And my mom said, shut up, go do your college applications. You're being ridiculous. Like, Dad, stop even entertaining this notion, right? Yeah. So that's the kind of attitude that changed. And like, that's exactly, yeah. Like, from 6 to 12, I wanted to like be like my parents. And then something happened between 13 and 18. And we'll go into the later stages. Eventually it comes full circle again. But yeah, so definitely this is real stuff, yeah.
Yeah, so the next phase, which is 13 to 18, right? This is the teenage years, 13, 19, depending, and this could actually go on for quite a while, depending on the person. But basically, oftentimes, we're trying to define who we are as a kid growing up, and there's a sense of wanting to be my own person. What my parents want me to do, I don't actually want to do that because I want to do something different. And so here is oftentimes when there's a lot of difficulty in the relationship, because before that, especially in Asian society, there's a sense of you just obey your parents, right? You just want your kids to follow what you're saying. So if that was a relationship, all of a sudden it does that 180, and the kid doesn't want to follow anymore, and all of a sudden it's like, what happened? And so, and often sometimes the parents come is at that stage, and I tell them, well, ideally at 6 to 12 you talk to them, because at 15, it's going to be really hard to talk with them. So what can I do at this point? What do I do? My kid's already, in this difficulty. So if you really want to do it, there's a couple ways to do it. One is, okay, I'll go through probably the quickest way, and it's the most difficult way. And I'll say the quickest and most difficult way is that you really work on yourself and you change yourself for the better, in the sense of you really look at the things in your life that you can improve in. If it's, for instance, fighting with each other, like your spouse, or doing something in a way that is really, you don't really like, and it's not a good thing to do, and you actually, you call it shoshing, right? Shoshing. You actually work on your character and you change, and you explain that to your child and say, I'm really working on this fault of mine. Can you please let me know and help me in this process? Whoa, if you actually change, that's life-shattering for most kids, to see their parents actually change in a way that's very genuine. So that to me is like the most, if you can actually do that, which is the most difficult, of course, changing ourselves is the most difficult thing of all time, right? And so if you actually do, that's like a grand slam. That's like you hit a home run. But if you don't do that, there's a lot of other things I would say, are on the process of that. And so the first thing I would say is a kind of a deep respect for the child, a respectfulness to the child. So oftentimes, in Asian culture, there's always a little bit of a sense of authority. The parents are in a place of authority, and the kids are supposed to listen to the authority. And in the West, that's not quite how it's set up. Not quite how it's set up. And I don't think you say the West is, the quote-unquote right way of doing it, or the Asian system is the right way of doing it. But I think a deeper principle that goes beyond both cultures is actually respect, right? But the way that respect is often shown in different cultures is different. So I would say, how does respect kind of get shown here in the West, in America, is a very thoughtful, careful listening. A very thoughtful listening. A listening where you're not saying you're wrong. You're saying something, I think you're let me give you a lecture about that. Let me give you a lecture about that before, to actually ask a real question. I say, Mom, I'm doing something, and I really don't know what I'm doing. Can you please help me out here and explain to me what I should do? Something really genuine. And ask, if it's on the flip side from a parent to a kid, asking the kid for something in a really honest way, and then listening to their response, or listening even to how their life is. Oftentimes, you can say those one-line answers come, and I was explaining to my mom the logic of it for a young person is oftentimes we learn very quickly what's the easiest way to get our parents to stop talking to us. That's the goal. It's like, so what do I need to say to stop this conversation as fast as possible without getting myself into trouble? Because if I get in trouble, then I get a scolding. That's even longer. I have to wear through a scolding. That's even more miserable. So if I can just get the right angle in my conversation so that I don't have to actually talk, I can get through this, And, that's, of course, not so great. But if you can have a heart of the parents really genuine wants to know, and you think about how to do that, because it's not easy. You actually have to think about who your child really is and think, so what are they interested in? Maybe you find out really what they're interested in. You ask them, I don't really know much about this. I don't know, like for instance, say American culture, having grown up in America, I don't know much about American culture. Can you please teach me a little bit about what you're learning you've grown up with here in America, or what you learned in school that you think will be helpful for me as a parent here in America? To open that door to start a conversation, and then just be there to listen. Don't listen to something and say, "Ooh, I don't like that. Stop talking." Just listen. So I tell the same thing to the kids. I say, if you're having difficulty with your parents, I say, just listen to your parents. When I say listen, it doesn't mean you have to be obedient and follow what they say, but that at least you hear what they say. You can make your own decision about what you want to do with that information later. But if you can't even listen to what they say without getting angry, then you've shut off a relationship and the wisdom that can potentially come from there. Because these are the people who care the most about you, who've given actually probably their lives for you, and are always thinking for your well-being. If you don't even know what they're saying to you, then you've lost something. So that's really hard. Let's say, that's often a very hard thing for a young person to say, okay, how do I do that then? And often it says, that's actually when we talk about mindfulness, this is a quick side, we might talk a little bit later, is mindfulness is actually a very good technique. People I know it's a really popular thing. I don't know if there's a constant, maybe Jerry's really good at sound, you could take a look at it too. But basically, mindfulness practice, quote unquote, is basically knowing what's on your mind, right? And so if you're just observing what's in your mind and not reacting to what's coming up, that's the practice. That's listening. That's listening inside without judgment, without reacting. So if I have a thought that I don't like this thought in my mind is a really quote unquote bad thought, it's an angry thought, it's a harmful thought, it's something I'm really ashamed of, I don't get angry at it. I don't push it down. I don't repress it. I just observe it. I just observe it. If it's something I really like, it's something like, oh, this is great, I really like it, you just observe it. You don't follow it. And that's the observing quality that we're training in mindfulness training, if you want to do mindfulness. And by having that place of mindfulness, you actually learn wisdom, because you start seeing things very clearly. And principle says everything that comes into being ceases to be. There comes and goes, comes and goes. And if you're just still and watching, they'll all come and go, and then you'll start seeing the deeper roots of where they're coming from. That's the principle. So similarly, that's inside. If we want to do it inside with ourselves, if we want to do it outside with, let's say, our children or our parents, it's the same process. We're just listening, absorbing, but don't let ourselves get lost in a attachment, right, and just get stuck somewhere. So that's really what I say for parents. If you want to actually develop a skill for communicating with kids at that age, it comes from this really respectful listening place. And if you can be really genuine at it and try it, it's going to probably fail the first 5 times, 10 times, 30 times, 100 times, but it's something you actually have to work on. You know, to try, and at some point maybe you might have a method.
And so I'd also just add, even from a kid's perspective, I can talk about one of my own experiences. As a typical teenager, I butted heads a lot with my parents when I was in high school. And actually one of the things, the breakthrough, actually I remember a specific one, was that at one point I decided that maybe I would just listen to whatever my dad told me to do. And just listen and just do it. And so I know that's like a little bit different from the whole don't just obey thing, but I tried it for, I tried it for a little bit. And the reason is because my dad always thought was like, oh, he's micromanaging me. He like even would get into how I held my pencil and things like that, right? But then, you know, I tried to listen to him, and what ended up happening is that like there's that change in attitude, and actually the response from that change in attitude is actually, it was true. There was really something that happened, because once he sees that I'm doing everything that he's doing, or that he's telling me to do, he saw that I was getting overwhelmed, and then I remember he came up to me at one point and said, wow, I really micromanage you quite a bit, right? And I said, yes, I think you actually do have a lot of opinions on how I conduct my life, right? And actually that improved our relationship quite a bit, because once he realizes that, and that took a two-sided thing. Like, for one thing, before that, it was like he would tell me to do something, I would resist, and then all he sees is that basically nothing he's saying is going in, right? But for me, like the moment I became receptive, more of a listening kind of aspect, I was kind of letting myself vulnerable, saying, okay, let's try it your way for a while, right? And then it also took my dad being open-minded enough to kind of realize and see what exactly he was asking me to do. And then that we were able to find a middle ground, and actually it improved our relationship rather significantly.
That's great. So how about
Okay, next phases. Okay, so we have a couple more phases. We have we say 18 to 24. These are college age, right? This is when most kids go to college. And this is when they begin actually living a pretty independent existence. They start exploring, wanting to find out new things. And they're actually away from the immediate parental watchful eye, you could say. You know, they're mostly with young people their age. And so there's a lot of things happen usually during that time, I think people know. And I think from a parent part, oftentimes this is a process of letting go and a chance to see actually, have you really prepared them for this part of their life? So that's where I see is if you actually know a little bit about what it's like to go to college in America and what the challenges and things that are happening, you're actually trying to prepare your children so that when they meet the challenges and difficulties of life outside of your immediate control, they know what to do. And that they may be, just what we were talking with the other person a moment ago as well, when my mom made a comment, says, oh, you don't want the kid to like drop, like you said drop the ball or something? What did you say?
No, actually when the kids were around, I think if you see something, it's not, like they did not do their homework, you're going to, you know, try to remind them. But, or like for my younger son's example.
Poor Darren.
For Darren, yeah. He did not start his college application process until like early October, and that was, you know, the due date, the early admission was November 1st. So that was like, you know, you just feel you want to help out. But I think the bad thing happens, he went away to East Coast and for college, and so he survived, I survived. Actually, it turned out to be better for both of us.
Probably. And so what, at least the principle was oftentimes, you know, as a parent, we always want to protect the kid. But at the same time, sometimes, and I think they gave the analogy of holding the ball. You don't want the ball drop, is what you said. And I say sometimes you do have to let the ball drop. And so the ball drops and it can bounce up again, right? But if the ball drops and just like an egg and it splatters, then it's not so good. And if you never give them the skills to drop and bounce up again, then when they meet the first failure in their life, they splatter, right? And that's, I think, happens quite a bit with sometimes having grown up in Silicon Valley, and we're always kind of success-oriented, and especially with college applications, as I hear it, I think somebody just forwarded me an article from New York Times about this kind of success syndrome. You know, kids are just on this success-driven thing. They're like the president of their club or doing all these things, and they never actually really met failure. And when they hit real failure or something that's not even really failure, they have no context to understand it from within, that they get really upset, and they can even take their own life. You know, and so that's one element, is that to give the bigger perspective. And that's why, again, why this topic I think is very relevant about bringing the generations closer together, is because I think if this root is strong, if your relationship with your parents and these roots are strong, and your parents are paying attention to the real character of the kids, the true place of virtue and happiness in the kid, not the externals, then regardless of what happens in the externals, the kid has a root to navigate by and find peace and happiness through. If it's always on the externals, where the pressures are, then if those things fall, of course, you can't depend on them. Everything changes in the world. We can't control it. And the economy could crash, you know, we could have a war break out, you know, we never know what could happen. But if that root is strong, then that carries the day. But if the root's not there, and it's just external, maybe it might look good on the outside for a period of time. My experience was, this was actually something that drew me to really interested in monastic life, was because I started asking a lot of questions about life around, you know, high school years, and looking around, I have to say, I felt that in Silicon Valley, a lot of the parents seemed very successful, and at potlucks seemed very happy and successful. But when I really went into the family, I started asking my friends, really, how are your parents doing? And my parents' friends, really, how are things? How do you communicate with your kids? Do you communicate with each other? I found it was a very different story. And that's, to me, is the experience might look good, but the internal core is troubled. And as I said, for young people like John and myself, looking at that, if we see that in our parents, then we don't want to follow that. That's not what we want to go for. Right? So, okay, so that's maybe, say, college ages. There's a time for letting go, and hopefully, if you gave them a foundation, they will grow to be their own independent person, which allows them, particularly when I said a moment ago, at 25, 26, sometimes 30, depending, and if they have the foundation and that relationship of listening to one another, then there's often a return. They often go, oh, my parents, they might actually have something to tell me, because I'm doing things that are relevant to what they did, as, you know, raising a kid, for instance, or making a decision on a job, or these things that we see. Then we kind of are more mature and we go back. There's this kind of returning. So this is it's like a whole picture. So for a parent, I think you know that there's different stages in this process. And there was recently a quote that I heard, and this came from Chinese culture. I don't know exactly the source, but I think it's 十年树木，百年树人。Yeah, okay, so how it works in Semi-Chinese is...
Sounds like you've heard that before.
Yeah, I think everybody knows that one. I guess it's really famous. Well, I've heard it the first time just fairly recently. I'm like, that's a really strange quote. It says it takes 10 years to raise a tree. It takes 100 years to raise a person. And I thought, what? 100 years to raise a person? Isn't it 18 years? You're done, right? 18 years, the kid has grown up, they go off into college, and then I thought about, wow, that's a lot of, and I really thought about, that's actually a lot of wisdom. If you think about raising a kid, it's a 100-year process. You don't look short, and it's actually many, as I said, there's different phases. So after 25, when they're, say, 40, 50 years old, often what happens? Oftentimes at that point, they're probably taking care of their parents, you know? The parents at that time are probably 70, 80, you know, and then when their kids are 70, 80, oftentimes the parents are even gone. And so I think in society right now here in Silicon Valley, we often just focus on the years between, like, say, 18 and 35, whereas the years of success, you know, those are like the years of glamour. But if you really look at a full life, right, are you raising your kids so when they turn 50, they will actually take care of you with real respect? I mean, that's a question. So if you want to have that fruit grow when they're 50 years old, what are the seeds we're planting when they're 5 years old, 10 years old, 12 years old? Because that's the seed, that's another fruit you want to have grow. Not just the success at 35, that's a short-term gain. But if you look at 100 years to raise a person, that means even when they're 100 years old, when they grow old and maybe their body stops working, will they get depressed? Will they get angry? Or will they be very happy knowing they lived a really good life? Right? What are the seeds we're planting so that when they're 100 years old, they're a real person? So I thought it was an interesting. I heard that, I'm like, huh. Then I thought, actually, that's real principle. That's real principle. So if you think about the phases of life, it's not just 18, 25, 40. If you go with 100, you can really kind of plan out a kid's life, right? Okay, at 100 years old, what do I want him to be doing, her to be doing? You know, what's that look like?
So I would, the one thing I wanted to add was like in terms of the virtue of failure, allowing people to fail, is that eventually they're going to have to be independent. Everyone's going to have to be independent, deal with their own failures. And in a way, I think actually this idea of not letting your kids fail is actually really debilitating in many ways, because really the early years are your opportunity to use practice failures effectively. Because the consequences are smaller. When you're like, what's the worst thing that happens when like a 6-year-old fails, right? They're embarrassed maybe or something, right? What's the worst consequence when somebody, you know, fails when they're 30? They may lose their job or something like that, right? So it really is, I think, and also it's 18, at least in American culture, that's usually when the kid leaves the home. So that's, before that is your opportunity to be there when they're failing. And help them guide through that entire process. Of course, this always has to be balanced with the size of the failure that you allow. If my kid's going to jump off a cliff, I'm probably going to stop her, right? But then all the small failures, you kind of lead them up. Failure is like a practice, really, right? Teaching people to deal with it, and the earlier you start, the better, just like any other skill, right?
Just an attitude that I started with is actually, if you don't think of failure as failure, just think it as an opportunity to learn, your perspective is very different. So if you just go to every single instance in your life with the sense that I'm just here to learn, then if you fail, quote unquote fail, as other people, failure is just a projection of the mind. We have this category in our mind, what's success, what's failure. Usually it's externally defined, you know, something that we saw outside that people are defining for us. But in fact, it's just everything is more or less the same. It's an opportunity to learn. If we have that attitude, every chance is an opportunity to learn, and we can really just grow with everything that comes. Then the whole perspective changes. Yeah.
So, anything more you want to add, or we should move on to the next?
Yeah, we want to make sure that there's time for questions and everything too.
So
Yeah.
next
One more
we,
section.
yeah,
We have one more section.
we have learning from each other section here. What were some of the things you learned from your parents? What are the things parents can learn from their children?
Okay, so I realized we didn't actually go over the format beforehand, so let me just do a quick synopsis so people know what we've done so far. So we started with the kind of the differences between the generations, and then what we just talked about in this last section was how to maybe bring the generations together. And the last one we were just focusing a little bit more on learning from one another, the generations learning from each other. So that's the question. And so I actually already talked about this, so maybe I don't have to talk about it as much, but one place of learning from each other is, as I mentioned, is listening. And that listening, I think, has, you could say, multiple elements to it. One is that actual listening to the other person without judgment, which I mentioned, kids to parents, parents to kids, right? But there's another layer to that, is if you're listening to the other person, let's say the person is actually listening to you, right? The question is, do you have anything to say that's of any worth, right? That's a good question. Do I have anything to say of any worth? Like, am I just gonna, like, nothing to say? I don't know if the person really wants to listen to me, and I don't know what to tell them. I don't have anything to tell them, right? So that's the next. So what do you actually have to say to them, and do you know how to say it, right? And so the third element to that is I often see that comes from actually listening to ourselves first. If we can really listen to ourselves deeply, then when we say something, it has some worth. But it requires us to listen inside. We talk a little bit about mindfulness. I mean, that's a kind of a catchword nowadays, but it's so, in a way, so simple. You know, it could just be writing in a journal. It could be just being really honest with ourselves. It could be something, having a really good friend. Like sometimes, I know so much with Jonathan now because I'm in the monastery, but you know, we could have long talks about really what's going on. They say there's a saying that if you find a friend who's willing to point out your faults, then really keep them around, because they're really precious. Usually if somebody's telling our faults, we want to, you know, I don't want to hear that. And we just hang around people who kind of make us feel good about who we are. But from real virtue, people who can point out really our faults in a nice way, a caring way, then they're our real friends who are trying to improve us and make us better people. If we have those kinds of people around and we talk to them, they often can illuminate something inside as well, inside of ourselves. And so that's what I think when we listen deeply to ourselves and ask people we know have wisdom around us, you know, our friends, our parents. We talk about elders a lot, being respectful to elders. I think particularly elders, why there's that respect is because it keeps, you could say from a personal perspective, it keeps the door open for wisdom, for you to have access to wisdom. And for young people, oftentimes, that's my way of evaluating how they are as people in terms of their stability is, do they have access to wisdom? Because for sure, there's going to be issues in their lives. But when those issues arise, can they get to wisdom? And wisdom, I mean, is seeing clearly things for what they are. How when this happens, something else comes from that. Clearly, not through somebody else's attachments or projections or expectations, but just saying, really, this, if you want to do this, then this happens, and this happens, and this happens. This is how you can go about your life in a way that will bring you real happiness. That's real wisdom. 智慧, right? 就智慧. And so, if you can develop that wisdom, an inner wisdom, then you have something of real worth to share with your kids. And I think that's the job of parents, and that's the job of elders. If an elder grows old and doesn't have any wisdom, then there's very little to share. You know, an elder won't have the same energy to go work out in society and do the things that a young person can, but they'll have real life experience. They can see things very deeply. But that takes cultivation, it takes time to do. And so if some elder can develop that, then the elder in the home is a real asset. It's a real asset. They're patient, they're able to, anything that happens, no problem, I've seen it all, no problem. And the family can be very peaceful. You know, if having an elder in the home was just no problem. Like my mom's side, the grandma was very much like that. She was just a constant, peaceful presence, always smiled, you know, walked around very smiling, didn't say too much. And that was a very peaceful presence. And so that's what I would kind of encourage, is that there's, we say maybe 3 levels of listening. Listening and to asking the other person, to hear the other person, developing one's own ability to share something of meaning and worth. And I would say, actually we have one person here, Brian Conroy. I don't know if he's still in the room, he's in the back, sitting in the very back. Anyways, he's a storyteller. And I think that's actually a very important skill to learn. He actually taught storytelling in the monastery at one point, and I went to his classes. And if you're a parent, I actually really encourage, I don't know what's the context for learning how to tell stories, but basically stories is how you teach wisdom, how you teach life experience. And so if the stories you're telling is really boring, you know, you're up against like modern movies nowadays, so you have to develop some skills. You know, kids have very short attention spans, so if you tell a story, if you can do it with some energy and some spirit, then you keep their attention. It's a skill. It's a skill to learn. And you can make it fun, right? And so I think it's really worth doing. And if you can do that, then you can share those stories with your kids. And then the third part was looking inside. If you can find some time every day to say, what really do I care about? What really am I doing? You know, you can write it down, you can ask your friends, you can ask somebody you respect, and you develop some real wisdom. Then you have something to share. So that's sort of the 3 elements.
So the thing I would also bring up is that this brings it back to listening again, which is that we focus a little bit about how the parents share the wisdom with the children, but actually as a new parent right now, I'm realizing my 1-year-old is even teaching me quite a bit about myself. And the reason for this is because effectively a 1-year-old is still at that sponge stage. It's just it's like looking into a personality mirror, really is what it is. At one point we had, my wife brought our daughter over to daycare, and then she saw Whitney, that's my daughter, walk up to another kid who was playing with a toy, and then Whitney looked at it, took it away, ran away, played with it for a little bit, and then just dumped it in the corner. And the other kid was sitting there looking like they just got mugged, right? and then so my wife Wing came back and said, I think our kid might be a bully, right? And we're thinking, wow, where did she learn this kind of behavior? But then the more we thought about it at home, that's kind of a game we play with each other. We're like, ha, we got it, you know, like with each other. Like my wife and myself even were like, oh, maybe we taught something we didn't know we taught in a way, right? So it's like really, that's even at a very young age. I mean, and this especially happens later, which is basically, yeah, like you don't realize what you're teaching your kids until your kids kind of like teach it right back at you in a way, right? So that's where the listening comes in. Even a 1-year-old is teaching me stuff about myself. Oh my goodness, like the fact that we complain how she doesn't sleep like she doesn't have a good sleep schedule. Then we look at our own sleep schedule and it's like, I thought it was just because we're busy, but maybe like, yeah, she's learning that too in a way, right? So what I would say is that, yeah, definitely on top of even storytelling, there's times where you don't even know you're telling a story in a way. But it's still, that's where the mindfulness comes in. You start realizing what exactly you're saying especially when you have a kid, because that's when the kid is like a sponge and showing you exactly what you're showing them. Yeah, it's part of their learning behavior to mimic you, but then it also helps you a little bit, and it's like seeing what exactly they mimic. We curse a lot less now at home, I think, yeah. So I'm just hoping those aren't her first words, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, so I would like to share my own experience. My mom, who has since passed away, I remember when we were young, like when we had people coming to our house to help out with the housework, she has always been kind to other people. And she just, I think in a way, it's a very, again, you know, it's her behavior we pick up. And so like in school, like when we went to school, you know, we were nice to the teachers, to the friends. But the kids in our family, we were always nice to the custodians and all the other people, you know. And as a matter of fact, you know, some of you might know my background. I'm a CPA, so there were years I was auditor, going to, you know, to audit people's work, you know. And one thing I realized is like I'm always like nice to the secretary, and you know, like sometimes people in our society, sometimes you kind of rank people, feel like, you know, the CEO is higher, you know, like the staff, the secretary, custodian, or, you know, janitor, they are lower. But really, we are all equal. And I think when I was, you know, when we have people came to our house to help cooking, I'm not the best cook. I think a lot of you know about it. So. And I was busy, you know, like now I'm doing more cooking. But when I was busy, you know, I had someone come in to help with the cooking. And I told my kids, I say, you know, you always call Ayi, you know, like you are nice to the lady. And I say, this lady actually is providing her service to us, just like a mom providing my service to my clients, doing their tax returns. So I think that's something, I think if we can have that mindset, and if we can walk the talk, I think that's the most powerful, you know, to influence our kids and people around us. So I think,
Yeah.
oh, you want
Maybe
to
I can add that, because
okay.
now you said that, it actually came up a little bit recently, which is somebody asked about kind of one of the things I learned from my mom, and actually that's something I definitely really feel very fortunate that I was exposed to as a kid, that sense of respecting everyone for who they were. That's very helpful also in the monastery. You know, in the monastery, the value system is very different. You know, in the monastery we do everything. You know, you wash the bathroom, you take care of everything from, you know, I don't need to go through my daily schedule, but basically we start at like 4 a.m. in the morning. But basically, it's a very simple schedule, and the whole value system is turned around. Often they say the real, you can say, awakened masters are working in the kitchen, you know, the people who you don't expect. And I think that's actually a valuable thing sometimes to think about in families now, is oftentimes we take sometimes too much of the values that the society gives us around ranking people or certain things about success, and and that sometimes blinds us really who the children are, who are before us, because we think that, you know, they have to be. I'm going to give a stereotype, but don't take me literally, I guess. But they say math and science is something very popular in this area, I think, for sure, right? And the humanities oftentimes not so emphasized. And so let's say a child really is gifted in the humanities. Well, that might not be recognized and fostered in the same way that they were really good at math and science. And if you just look at a normal group of people, there's going to be some people who have that skill and that talent, and the other people with other skills and other talents. Does that make one side better than the other group? Not for sure. Not for sure. Well, does that mean that one group's going to contribute more to society and humanity than the other person? Not for sure. You know, it's very different. So sometimes if we just change the system we're using to evaluate what's going on, it gives us a lot more space to look at society. If we just only got one view and one vision, it can get very narrow. And so just that spirit of respecting everyone and treating everyone as equally, that's a really solid principle. That if you do it at home and then your kids learn that from you, they can really go into their lives with strength and happiness. And also, for instance, if they do end up doing chores, I remember we were doing something at one of these events, and I was helping like wash the dishes afterwards. He said, oh, you don't have to do that. I said, no, I enjoy doing the dishes. He says, oh. I said, actually, it's really important to enjoy doing these kind of things, because probably most of your life, this is the things you're going to mostly be doing, right? You know, and actually, there's a quick funny story. Is I actually learned washing dishes from going to Jonathan's house, because I went to his house, and he would do the dishes, so we just joined in doing the dishes. I think a lot of our friends probably learned doing dishes at Jonathan's house. I don't know, right? Yeah. And then what happens is later my mom finds out, wait a moment, you're doing dishes at Jonathan's house? You can do dishes at our house. And so, okay, I said, okay, you know, so that's how it started.
My house is a very dangerous house to go to.
Yeah,
for
it's a
other
very
kids.
dangerous house to go to. Yeah. So, anyways, that's the kind of the spirit is. And I think actually giving children at a young age that level, that kind of sense of responsibility in the family is really good. Not just to let them study. Your job is just to do well in school and be successful in school. Is you're part of the family. Let's all make this family work together. You know, that's a different spirit. Okay.
Yeah, so I think we have talked a lot so far. Have we received any questions from the audience?
Do they have no cards?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, we can collect.
So while you are filling out the cards, we have some questions that we wrote out in case you haven't turned in your.
Well, actually, first of all, I mean, if anyone didn't get a chance to write it down, is there anyone who just wants to stand up and ask a question now? If not, yeah, we can definitely go into our own questions.
Okay. So one question is, what is the influence of modern media technology on kids? Does this influence the communication between parents and children? Jonathan, you start first.
So I can definitely, I can't speak to how it influences kids because my kid doesn't read yet, I guess. So there's not a whole lot there, but I can't say how it's influencing our generation right now. I know that this has been written about extensively in like recent Time magazine articles, different like New York Times articles. It's about how social media does put a different kind of pressure on our generation now, because very few people put on social media how they're struggling or how like, you know, all the awful, you know, like the horrible meal they just ate or something like that. It's always about the wonderful vacations they went on to, like the wonderful meal that they just had, you know, how they're, you know, even like how their kids are doing so great. And what ends up happening is that you get this really biased view of how everyone's life is going. Where you think, wow, everyone's traveling all the time, having a great time, when really most of the time they're washing dishes, I guess, right? And I can say, and then, you know, and it feels different because when I'm washing dishes, like, oh man, my friends are all like in Paris. Well, Paris is a bad place right now, but you know, like I guess they're traveling, they're having a great time, and here I am washing dishes with my kid who just pooped on me, right? But you know what? That's actually probably what most of them are doing too, right? In fact, actually, I'm pretty sure Steve has some poop stories probably already, yeah. But we don't post about it. Maybe we should, but also I don't think people want to read about it necessarily. But having that perspective is really important. Knowing, I remember this is actually something that my wife told me. I didn't even notice it myself. She said she felt like a pressure to be a perfect mom because there's this generation that like there's this culture of like kind of posting ideal things about being a mom online and everything, and she felt a lot of pressure and she had to constantly remind herself it's like, no, every parent goes through struggles and like it's not just me, and it's unfortunately something that like we have to deal with ourselves and that we have to be honest with our friends so that they feel comfortable opening up also about those struggles too. It's different because before I think it was like a lot more person-to-person interactions with Zhanghai's generation that, you know, you see each other's struggles a lot more because you're in their house and you see how crazy their kids are, you know. David and I, I call him David, yeah.
Eating a lot.
And eating a lot, yes. As an example, this venerable monk next to me, Jingshen Shi, one of our first memories together was lighting lanterns on fire in front of her house. She's not listening right now. She probably doesn't actually even know this happened. But we set a bunch of stuff on fire in front of her house. She had no idea how close she was to getting her house burned down, you know? But that's the kind of environment. And you see that a lot more when you're in person versus on social media. We certainly weren't going to post that on social media, right? So that's something that I think is, different about this generation. You see each other's, but only each other's good side, actually.
So I think the question of media is actually a very important question for modern times. I get a lot of questions around kids being addicted to media, particularly addicted to video games, because I mean, I myself was pretty addicted to video games growing up, and I think it's often because it gives a sense of success and purpose, and especially I remember why I was particularly immersed in it a lot was because I didn't really have actually very strong relationships with people around me. I was actually kind of teased a lot at school. I didn't really have that many, I would say, good, really close friends. And so I ended up spending a lot of time on the computer playing games because you can kind of feel like you're doing something that's really interesting and engaging, and I'm sure, and the games now are the kind of games I only dreamed of then. If I were to imagine now, the games that I actually haven't played a video game for a long time, so I don't know all the things that are out there, but just getting a sense of it, I can see how appealing it can be. And so, what do you do? What can one do? And I have to say, I think, again, why this particular topic is valuable is I think it comes from one place, I think there's many other factors, but one place that helps is developing real relationships and kind of activities that are based on real relationships, not virtual things. And so for me, actually, what got me out of playing video games was actually playing a lot of basketball with these two guys around me. We would play basketball many, many hours a day, especially this guy right here. He played basketball all the time. And that opportunity to get out, use my body, the energy that comes from playing a sport, and then having real friendship with people, communicating not with verbal talking, but with physical movement, especially as guys, oftentimes talking doesn't go so far, but if I can watch how you dribble, I know who you are. I know how you steal from somebody, how you actually deal with each other on the playground or on the basketball court. We learn a lot about each other, and that's how we relate. It's not a verbal thing, it's a direct hands-on activity. And I always say oftentimes with fathers and sons, maybe that's a really good way to relate too, because sometimes you might not have anything interesting to say. And maybe you probably don't get very good exercise either. So if you go on a sports team or do something more physical, go hiking, go camping, go running, go play some basketball, do something in that vein, you develop that other type of relationship, which is different than just verbal communication. And so that was, I would say for myself, really what helped me out of that phase was I realized, I have really good friends who I like to be around, that took me away from just playing games all the time, just a virtual world that was. I have to say now it's probably even more difficult because I realize now that I stopped playing right when online gaming became really popular. So my friends weren't actually in the game itself. So now it's a little bit trickier because the online part is also in it. So how that works, I think if somebody has real experience in this area, and I know probably people are probably psychologists, I think they're looking into this question quite a lot, it might be worth looking into. It's something I think is really worth looking into, because it's pretty much here to stay. I think if people were to lose their electricity, it'd be okay. If they lost their internet, they really go crazy. So, whoa.
So Jonathan, what do you think for that?
I can speak a little bit about the video game. I definitely also grew up. I actually was a latecomer to the video gaming scene, mainly because my parents restricted it. My parents were a little bit more heavy-handed. Like when they thought we were watching too much TV, they'd move the TV into the garage. And we occasionally, I think, when they were playing maybe Nintendo 64 or something, I think I had an original Nintendo that I'd found from somewhere, and then it was just, I was always behind. But eventually, actually, that's something to say is also, I think it made me a little bit more prone to addiction later. I played a lot of video games during college.
That's a problem.
Because all of a sudden it's like, haha, no parents around, right? And fast internet and everything, right? But then eventually what happens, everyone that I know, in fact, actually my co-founder from my company, he was actually a ranked StarCraft player. I don't know if anyone here knows StarCraft, but he was like going to tournaments sponsored by a Korean gaming company and everything. But regardless of him versus Johnny come lately me, you know, all of us kind of came to the same conclusion. Eventually, real life kind of catches up to us in a way, right? Like he realized like, oh, I need to get my act together, and he ended up going to grad school and like studying neuroscience also. That's where we actually met. But I think what's important is that it's like what Jingchen was saying. It was like it's not something it's here to stay, right? And the question is how you deal with it. And in a way, like the earlier that you get a balanced approach to it for the kids, the sooner it's not like an addiction where it like actually has consequences. They're like, you know, basically they play too much and maybe they like lose sleep over a weekend when they're a kid, and then like eventually they adjust to it, right? And you're guiding them on that process, as opposed to them like losing their job in the future because they stayed up too late playing when they're like 30 or 40 or something like that, right? Which actually, surprisingly, does happen, I think, yeah.
Maybe one more thought about that, I just thought of it, was I think the other thing that makes a really big difference is if there's something more meaningful to live for. That's the other thing that's what drew me into, say, becoming a monk and going on this path is if you really find something more meaningful to live for, then you have a way to guide your life through. You have a compass that you can go, okay, this is really what I want to do. And then these other things you see, they can kind of get prioritized based on really how that really relates to what you really have an interest to follow, what you really want to do. And so that's something I really would also reflect on. What's really, why are we alive? What are we doing with ourselves? You know, if we can find that out, then I think that other question about all these other smaller things naturally get put in the right place.
So I think one question was, what's your view about letting teens using devices and computers? Should parents implement parental control? I think you kind of touch on it, but I think it's a burning question in a lot of parents' mind. So if you have something more specific?
I have my own philosophy on this, and this, once again, we try to go away from like our own philosophies and more toward like the principles below, but I can tell, actually, you know how my parents moved the TV into the garage at one point. Those were actually some of the best years of my life. At that point, I started playing in the backyard a lot more, and if I really wanted to watch TV or play video games, I would go to his house, right? And actually that was good because it's like a built-in limit. At that point it becomes a social thing. Now you're seeing friends, right?
Yeah.
And there's ways to handle this, and I think it's about like managing it with the knowledge that it's the same thing as when your kids are going to go to college. They're going to have access to their own devices eventually. Like even like whether it's devices or like just how they spend their time, drugs to some degree, right? There's even like I remember actually the first time I went to a McDonald's after I was no longer like living with my parents. I just realized like, hey, I can get 2 value meals. There's nobody stopping me, right? And it did take, you know, for a while it took like about 15 pounds later, and like, but eventually I got over it, right? And that, like the question is whether that happens at home or if it happens out there. It's all gonna happen, right? I mean, like they're gonna have a device. If they're the, you know, person at work who still doesn't have a smartphone, you may have debilitated them in another way, you know? So I would say manage it, really. And early on, I would say like when they're really young, go for a heavy hand. That's how I'm gonna try to do it. Because like at that point they're still listening, and then kind of ease them in and like find out that hey, this like access to this device is a privilege, it's powerful. There's also downsides to it, and like just educate them about that as they can understand it.
Yeah, just like what Jing Chansi was saying earlier, I think doing hiking and Boy Scout has been a great activities, and also sports and other extracurricular activities. Yeah.
Just I'm not going to add in terms of principle, but I just want to highlight something that Jonathan said. So what I would do when I went to his house, we would go to his backyard and we'd grow corn. we would play with this potato gun. He'd be raising black widows. Black widows, okay? Yeah. So, I mean, so this is the kind of stuff we would do
There
in his
are
house.
other risks to
Yeah, the other
locking
risks
your
about
TV into the garage.
with this guy around. I mean, so we did a lot of really fun stuff at his house that didn't involve gaming.
Okay, another question I have here is it too late if the parent-child relationship is not deeply rooted, but your child is in the teens? I think you might have touched that a little bit, but want to emphasize a little more.
I mean, I would just say very easily, it becomes harder the later you start, but but it's never too late, right? I mean, I don't know too many people like beyond my age right now, but I know that there's some people who've like fixed up their parental relationships well into their 30s, 40s, 50s even, sometimes. So it's never too late, and it takes longer as you get later in life.
And patience.
And patience, yeah. Because at that point you have more history, you have you have to unravel a whole lot more the older you are, but like eventually, it's always better now than later, right? Because it'll only get harder the more you wait, right?
Yeah, I completely agree with what Jonathan just said. And I think if you really have that heart to do that, then the question is, then what to do, right? What to do. And that's, I think, what we were hoping just to start today. We're not giving any, as I said, we're not experts, so we're not giving like really solutions. I think if anything, things make sense, if you can go home and think about it and then try it out and see if it works. If it doesn't work, then stop doing it. You have to actually like test these things out. If they work, then if they don't work, don't do it, right? You have to actually see, because your kids, every kid is different. Everybody's different, so you have to test them out. And that's exactly what we're trying to talk about today is what are some skills that we can develop to approach this question? And so I mentioned two, which I think are, for myself, the most effective that I can see. One was if the parents can really change from the inside out, and the kids can see that, that's very transformative for the kid. And then also, in a way, if you want to really teach your kids something of meaning, to teach them that they can actually change who they are for the better, I mean, wow, that's something that's a really deep teaching in and of itself, to actually see that modeled in a person. I mean, that's the great teachers who created the Chinese culture, the Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism, and all these these traditions. Usually it came from people who were working at their character at such a deep level that they moved other people to then create a whole culture and value system out of that. That's the roots. And so if we want to plug back into that root, then that's one place to go, right? And then the other one I said is that developing that kind of listening, patient listening, non-judgmental, patient listening quality. And if we can do that, that's another skill to develop. And if both those don't work, then we can try to investigate other ways. But I think if we apply ourselves there, then bit by bit something might start happening. If it's, I want them to be like this right now, that probably won't happen. As we said, that quote was by, 10年立树百年, no, 10年树木百年树人, right? You have to wait a long time. It might take you 20 years. But if you don't plant the seeds now, then 20 years later, the seeds can't ripen. So one of the things I think is a really good principle is don't worry about the result. Just worry about the causes you're planting right now. If right now you plant good seeds, you will know in the future you'll have good results. But if you never plant the seeds, the results will never come. So the seeds you plant down, maybe they don't bear fruit right now. But if you're patient, just like raising a plant from the ground, right? Anything we do takes time. So you can't expect, actually most of the time saying something to your kid doesn't really do much. It's showing them something from your actual being changing that influences them to be something else. Right?
I think also a general theme on top of this is kind of like getting to the practical, kind of almost like tactical level of this, is that there's a difference between just saying you're going to change and what I think is like, it's almost like dieting in this way. Like almost all diets just end and then you just flip right back, right? Because people are trying to change too much, it's like really what you're trying to create here is almost more like on a level of habit. Not like you with the force of mind decide to do this for the rest of your life, but like, so practically speaking, usually a lot more things that are successful tend to happen in small steps, right? So maybe it's not like, okay, like, son, we're gonna talk now, right? We're gonna talk every day and we're gonna communicate, you know? That's like me saying, like, now is the day that I lose 50 pounds, you know? It's like, no, that's not gonna happen that way, right? So instead, really, they might start off with like, okay, you know what? You guys have lots of stuff happening in your lives, but the one thing, we always have dinner together. We don't even have to talk. We just have to all be at the table, and you can like be silent for a while, and eventually, like, things start coming out of that. It becomes a habit. That's your time to connect. You can actually start from there. So it's the kind of thing that, like, I would recommend, like, small steps, and as they become habits, you can build from that. It's really seeds. You're not planting a tree. Yeah. You're planting a seed, right? Yeah, that's gonna grow, right?
Yeah, along with the same line, how to help kids develop a sense of purpose and responsibility.
Sense of purpose or responsibility?
John, you want to say something?
I would say that goes back to actually the allowing your kids to fail thing. Because if you never give them, responsibility means two things. One is kind of like, there's the kind of behavior that goes along with being a responsible individual. But the thing is, like, you're not truly responsible for something unless you take the consequences of whatever happens. So if you never set that up, they're not really responsible. Like, if your kid only does their homework because otherwise you take away their dinner or something like that. I say that, I'm very food-centric, it seems. I'm very driven by food, actually, yeah. But, if it's like because of that consequence that you put on them, then it's like an external thing. But instead, if it's like, what you really want to get to the point is like where a kid, if they don't do their homework, then they don't get a good grade, therefore like all these other things don't happen, like kind of expose them to that, like in a way. Like, you can create some internal consequences, like of you as parents, like you get mad at them if they don't do something, but eventually you have to create it like where they have real world consequences on all this. And I think that's actually, responsibility stems from being allowed to fail in a lot of ways.
Yeah, so was there another card?
There's a couple more cards here, yeah.
Yeah, you want to just...
read them?
Or you, like...
Well, I didn't quite understand this question. It says, your best advice for first-generation Asian parents, then says 2, specifically to adult sons? What's an adult son? To their spouses?
I can guess, and
Okay,
I don't
please.
know, anyone in the audience can like kind of
Clarify?
if I'm completely off base.
Yeah.
I know I'm guessing a lot of you, like, I'm actually a perfect example. I am an adult son with my mother in the audience, I think somewhere, right? And I think we have a relatively good relationship, but the question is like, what is a good, so your best advice for first-generation Asian parents, specifically to adult sons and to their spouses. Now this is another level. And I think this is actually, okay, so this is actually quite a packed question, right? There's a lot happening here. There's the son, there's the parent who has an adult son. There's also the spouse of, who is also here, so this becomes a very charged question for me. But I agree, this is actually a very important topic, right? Because effectively what happens here is that my relationship with my parents, the moment you get married, it's kind of like you get also, for one thing, you get another set of parents that you also have to be filial to, right? Not have to, sorry, I say have to, but like it's like get to, but it's like just part of life.
It's a great opportunity to...
Sorry, honey, yeah, okay. But that's also on the same side, my wife also has gained another set of parents as well, right? And there's a certain relationship, and that's actually, in a way, what we're talking about with this method is like you planting the seeds. In a way, it's almost like you get the results of another family's work or lack of work that happened at that point, right? I mean, it comes with all the history of all the things you set up. I have my own neuroses, my parents have their own neuroses that are now part of all our family. And I think what happens is that this is almost identical to the question of like, what do you do for kids that are now beyond the teenage years, right? Now you have a new person in your life who is now like connected to you, but you had no hand in their upbringing at all, in a way, right? Once again, it's never too early to start. I think a lot of the same principles still hold. It's like you do want to communicate. If you want to have a good Because, I mean, in a way, the closest person, I remember this is like one of the weirdest things is that like, I'm trying to imagine my own daughter getting married where like, I'm the closest person in her life. First of all, I don't like thinking about that. But eventually it's probably gonna happen, right? So, but what happens is that like this person that I've been the closest person along with my wife to this person their entire life, and then all of a sudden, it's actually true, another person comes in who is now the biggest influencer in their life, right? Now you're also beyond that point where you like get to plant, like kind of like treat them like a child. You don't get to hide their TV in the garage, right? But what you do is like you do kind of create that kind of listening. You're trying to figure out what kind of person they are. You try to figure out like how you can help them the most, how they learn from them also, because they have almost, I guarantee you, will have a lot of lessons that you didn't even think about in your own family that could actually bring a lot. Like I can say for my own example, my wife Wing's family is a lot closer knit in a way that closer knit in the sense that they call each other a lot more often. They're a lot closer. My family just kind of like lets us do whatever we're gonna do. Now, after, it wasn't always that way. But then there's a certain virtue that comes from like being in constant communication as well. Her family, I believe, also learns from us in that we tend to be a little bit more live and let live. We can deal with differences a little bit more smoothly than her family. This is where it's like an opportunity to learn from each other constantly. And sometimes you get a sometimes like not the ideal starting point. There's a lot of conflict sometimes, like because your kid is out there and they get married to somebody who is very different from your family in some cases. It's time. You just have to start, and then over time, I guarantee you, if you keep to the principles that we're talking about, people in general want to be happy. And they want to be peaceful with each other. And it's a way of like trying to find where's that common ground, and the only way you can do that is through listening.
So, you want to ask?
No, I didn't even understand what the question was. I think that was right on.
Yeah. So I think at this time, we would like to do final
Okay.
remarks.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Do we? We had one more.
We got
do
one more, but
one
if
more?
we want
Just
to,
go on. I think because it's just one more, so we might as well,
Okay,
yeah.
well, this is a three-part question. It looks like it's got some Chinese on it, so I think it's good if you read it. I think I can read it, but it'd be good.
Sorry.
This is for you first. How did you find your passion?
and then I think the second and third
Second one,
is all related to the passion.
how had you gone through the process? Oh, then this one is for me. How have you gone through the process to support his decision about leaving the family? And then for John, what was it a surprise about your friend's choice? I meant becoming a monk.
Actually, that was true.
So you will start first.
Okay, I'll say. I won't go too long because there's various links of that story. So the question is, how did I find my
Your
purpose?
passion?
My passion. It was a little bit. I think I gave a couple of stories already about being in high school and seeing kind of what society offered, and I had to say I did really want to find something worth doing, and I had to say I did have that question, which Sean says is, am I going to just live my parents' life? Is this what I'm going to do? And I had to say at a very deep level inside, I said, I don't really want that. That's not really what I want to do. I don't think that's quite what I want to do. And so I really started looking. I started looking around with the various religious groups, went to various other activities. I started reading more spiritual authors, various monastic authors. And at one point, I remember it was kind of a funny story. I was in my economics class, no less, in high school, 12th grade, right? And our teacher was showing a video on a Trappist monastery. The Trappists are a Catholic monastery, a Catholic monastic tradition. And he basically said he wanted to expose us to an alternative economic system. Right? We've been learning all about economics. I think you guys were in the class, right? He still does. I was the only one who had this effect, though. I remember listening and watching the video and going, huh, these people sound just like me. What they're saying is what I'm saying in my heart about, as I talked a little bit earlier, about virtue, about living a Christ-like life, about living a humble life, about dedicating their lives to goodness, about you know, because I actually at that point also felt very deeply the kind of consumerism and the global issues that were happening, and I thought I didn't want to also have my life contribute that in a very serious way. And so seeing that simplicity of life and that really inspired me. So I remember going home, I thought, wow, this is what I want to do. I want to be a monk. And I remember going home to my mom, and at this time my mom, you know, I've already been saying I want to find my purpose in life, what I'm doing. And so I went home really excited. I told my mom, I figured it out. I figured out what I'm going to do with my life, thinking that she'd be extremely happy for me. And so she looks at me and goes, oh, what? What is it that you want to do? And I tell her, I want to be a monk. And I remember her face.
And this is right after he got his early admission to Stanford.
I don't even
And so
remember
was
that
not
part.
exactly what I expected.
I don't even remember that part. I just remember wanting to be a monk. And I remember from that point on, it was actually a very tense relationship for about the next 4 or 5 years. And in terms of just communicating with my parents, because I was so sure this is what I wanted to do, and I have to say this was interesting in my own processes because it was fed quite a bit by my Western upbringing, that I'm defining my own life, I'm doing my own thing, and my parents know nothing. that kind of thinking in my mind, you know, my parents, you know, what they think doesn't apply to me because I'm doing something that they don't understand at all. I'm just doing this, and I went at this new aspiration of mine, being a monastic. You know, I didn't know if I wanted to be a Catholic monk or a Buddhist monk, but I wanted to be a monk, and what that meant to me. And I just went at it until I basically, as I said, I got some advice saying I should listen to my mom more, which really kind of threw me for a loop because I was like, how does that make sense? My mom doesn't want me to be a monk. And I was getting this advice from a monk. This is really weird, right? And I went back and I thought about it and I realized, okay, so maybe I take all that energy I was putting on trying to be a monk and put it to trying to be a good son. And I realized actually in these things I was learning in the monastery, a lot of it was actually about basic virtue, about how to be a good son. I remember we had this book called Di Zi Gui, Standards for Students. The first line in it for kids, it says, when your parents call, respond immediately. I said, okay, I'll try it. You know, so I was like, okay, when my parents call, I respond immediately. And I would actually like practice it. I'd go home for like weekends. Like, for this weekend, I'm going to respond immediately. And I could only do it for like a weekend at a time, you know. And
Small steps.
Small steps. And I think it was similar to what Jonathan was saying, that he actually, when I heard his story, he was actually responding immediately to what his father wanted him to do something. And that actually, bit by bit, changed the relationship. And I also saw things I never saw before. Like, to be honest, I think my dad's here. But my dad often I felt was more aloof. You know, I think oftentimes Asian fathers are maybe often more farther away from their kids in some ways, in a certain sense. And I remember one point my brother was lying on the couch in the living room. I think after he watched TV and he was just sleeping on the couch. And I walked by him. And then I came back into the room and I saw my father with a blanket covering my younger brother. I thought, wow, that's really weird. I never thought my dad would ever do that kind of stuff before. Then I thought, wait a moment. I wonder, did I just never see it before? And I thought, I wonder if my dad did that for me. Then I thought to myself again, I said, why didn't I do that for my brother? You know, that was the kind of things that started turning in my mind. I was like, oh, ding, 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 ding. Like, when I started paying attention to a different set of values, all of a sudden my view of what was going on changed a lot. And so as a kid, my view was always, I'm trying to define who I am and do my own thing. My views was very narrow in that particular way, be my own person, do my own thing. But when I opened my mind, I said, okay, what I really want to try to do is to be a good son. And then, of course, it's different for every situation. But I had so much energy, I want to be a monk. I just channeled that into this place first. And I would say for kids who are trying to find their passion in life and they can't figure out what their passion is, if you just channel that energy first to this issue, like how to be a good son in the family and relate to your parents, if you work on that well, I think actually your passion will grow from that very naturally. So in fact, I also in my monastic life grew from that root of being able to relationship with my parents. Because to be honest, in the monastery, you have to be in a lot of relationships. You know, it's not like you're just by yourself all the time. You're constantly with other people, and you're relating to them in a way that is usually based on virtue. They correct you, you get feedback, you're trying to take care of seniors, your elders. There's this big relationship that's often based on the family. And so that's, I would say, the root. And so for myself, my aspiration came from I think seeing something I really wanted to do, you know, going at it full speed ahead with my own values growing up in the West to a certain extent, but at one point realizing I had to reorient that. And it was interesting, particularly at one point when my parents were a little bit more supportive of me doing it, like they weren't just like dead set against me. Part of me actually thought again, do I really want to do this? It was interesting because I realized when I had that thought, I realized there was a part of me that was just doing this just to be defining myself against my parents. And I realized, actually, that part I can let go. That's not a useful part of this process of who I am. Because to be honest, none of us are who we are by ourselves. We come from other people. We come from our parents. This idea of a self-made person in the West is not true. We don't make ourselves. We come from other people. And so there's no pressure to make you who you are. You should be independent. You should be responsible. But it's not to mean you have to be independent in rejection to something else.
Yeah, I think for me, because the time is limited, if you are interested in knowing the process, I did write an article for my high school, it's Northern California, Taipei First Girls High School publication. It's online, and I can email that to you. So, but I think as Jing Chuan changed, I changed also, and I also went through the process letting go, and I saw quite a few of my friends like they lost their child because sickness, and my mother-in-law passed away, and so I realized it's his life, it's not my life, and I have to allow him to do whatever he wants to do. As a matter of fact, I can just share with you one thing real quick. It's a story. When I was Saratoga Union School District Board member from 94 to 98, so when Jin Chuan graduated from Redwood Middle School, I gave him his diploma. And so this was 1998, I decided to move to the high school, and that time he was at high school. So I said to him, I say, David, at the time he was called David still, Mommy just want to let you know that I'm moving on to the high school as a board member, so I will probably give you your diploma when you graduate. So he looked at me for a minute, he didn't say a word, and then he said, you're not going to follow me to college, are you? And I think because I did not make enough contribution to Stanford, I did not become their board member. But I'm very happy to share with you, he personally invited me to serve on their university board. For 2 years, I was the chair, and I was able to apply a lot of things I learned over the last few years, as a board member. And then, this last 2 years, I'm the vice chair, and the school the university is doing wonderful. And it's going through accreditation programs. And so I can say, this time, actually, he invited me. I did not follow him. But then I found out, now he has, later on he's probably going to talk about, he has some projects he thought about, wanting to reach out to the families in the Bay Area. So he called me up, he said, Mom, you think perhaps you can help out? And I'm thinking, as a parent volunteer, I've always been a parent volunteer, and ever since my kids was in school. And now he has left home. I stay as a parent volunteer. And I'm very happy to do that. So, Jonathan, you want to say if you were surprised?
Oh, surprised. Yeah. I would say I was only, not even really surprised. Sadly, actually, I think it was more, Jin Chuan and I grew up together, did everything together, played sports together, played together, went to his house to watch TV, right? And eat together. And then it was only in high school when he started thinking about a lot of these things that we started diverging a lot more. Because in a way, he was thinking on kind of like interpersonal relationships level, what's the meaning of life? I was thinking about my problem set. I was thinking about my girlfriend, things like that. And it was just very different. So in a way, though, I mean, it was always kind of clear. And by the time you got to that choice point, I would say it was not a surprise. It actually made a lot of sense by then, given everything that you had learned, everything that, all the value that you'd found from the process. Definitely, by the time we were in college, it was no surprise. He woke up every day at 4 or 5 a.m. to go, I don't know because I was asleep, but he would go meditate, and then I would stay up till 3 or 4 a.m. That's the only time we met, is when he woke up and I was about to go to bed. Yeah. So definitely it was already clear at that point, and then we had kind of made our peace with it in a way like that. And that's actually, once again, when he officiated our wedding, it was because he had given, he was probably, of all my friends, was the one who could give me the best kind of like overall objective advice about like any kind of issues that I was having in my life. He also happened to be very good at physics and was able to help me with my problem sets as well. But yeah, so I would say by then it wasn't a surprise. In high school, it was definitely more, I just wasn't thinking about the same stuff as him. And it was even sometimes where like my dad was always trying to talk to me about life stuff, and then all of a sudden my best friend was also trying to ask me about life stuff, and I was like, oh goodness, right? but eventually, yeah, it actually all made sense by the time he decided to become a monk. Yeah.
Yeah, so at this time, we would like to do some, our closing remarks. So we'll start with,
Okay.
Yeah.
So just the last few words. So basically, the kind of project I was talking to my mom about, which was I think a little bit about the seeds for what happened today, was we called it something like generations, and my sense is that this topic is very important. Basically, how the generations relate and connect with one another, and something that's often overlooked. And if there'd be some way to develop some like organization or some project or something that people could make this a question that we look into, and say develop activities around. People can go camping together. People can go do things together, and maybe even have like storytelling classes together. I mean, things that are around these topics. Because I often find that, you know, there's a parent-child relationship, but oftentimes it's the people around that have the greatest influence, especially teenagers. Actually, oftentimes it's the kids' friends who have more influence than the parent, or your friends. Oftentimes, actually, a parent actually happens a lot. Is the other parents, what they say, like when I went to Mr. Xi's house to listen to him, had much more influence to say my parents talking to me, because there's a different relationship that's going on, right? And so if you develop that network, then it says it takes a village to raise a kid. And I think a lot of kids now are growing up in isolation. And even their parents, that relationship's not there, so they're really isolated. So if there's a way to actually actively create something, and so this is maybe one seed of that, and someday, I don't know when the future time comes, that this seed that's planted will bear fruit into something else in the future. That's, I think, my hope, something in the future.
and that's the parent volunteer comes into play.
Yeah, I thought it was a good project for my mom. So, Mom, this would be a really good project if you could work on this area.
So, Jonathan?
I would just say, yeah, I'm more of a student in this entire process. This is definitely something, I mean, and as I think this is one of the reasons why I'm on this panel, is also because I have a little bit more of a typical background, I guess, than a monk, and maybe, well, actually, I guess you're not an atypical experience. But really, in the end, I mean, like, I'm very busy with my work. I have a child, keeps me very busy. And then I think one of the things I would just want to remind us, like, this is actually in many ways maybe the most important thing in our lives. And a lot of times it helps to kind of like take a step back and be part of these things and like help think about, give yourself the space to think about these things, because when you get caught in the day-to-day routine, it's very easy to lose sight of what's important. And that's something I've definitely been guilty of myself. I've been guilty with in the past. So yeah, sometimes it requires these small steps, these structures, in order to keep an eye on all these things. And like I said, maybe the most important thing at the end of the day.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank everyone who has been patiently sitting in your chair for,
Or on the ground, thank you also, yeah.
for almost 2 hours. And now I would like to ask everyone to consider an action plan after this talk. No pressure, but perhaps we can do some self-reflections, observe the current patterns we have, and hopefully with what we discussed this afternoon, we can all become more mindful with our intent, words, and actions, and to develop a better relationship with our family members, friends, and all the people we encounter. Given the time we were, I think there were not too much dialogue, so then we answer a few questions. So again, if you are interested to receive more information, or what we just talked about is in terms of that group email list. We will try to. We will not respond to your question like individually, but we will try to.
So I think the spirit is we're kind of like a resource, and as I said, we don't have any real plan for this. We just kind of, this is actually a really good learning experience for us as we talked about amongst ourselves to kind of think about this. But we thought this might be a first seed, and we didn't really want to become like psychologists because we don't have real skill in that area. But if people send us a question, and then the three of us can talk about it, we can maybe come up with something that's a principle that would be valuable for everybody. To everybody to share. So that's, and to keep this topic alive in people's minds and discussions alive in people's minds. So you say, oh, this other person has this question, maybe this is relevant for me. So the idea was to have a group of people who are interested in this area, and then we can kind of put in seeds, and then where it goes from there, if people have ideas, they can share it with us, and we can, improve bit by bit.
Yeah, and at this time, I would like to make an announcement that we do have an organization called Chinese American Coalition for Compassionate Care, 美华慈心关怀联盟, which will be celebrating 10 years of serving community with a fundraising, serving community, and they will have a fundraising event on December 5th, 2015. This organization has provided comprehensive end-of-life education, training, and outreach to caregivers, volunteers, and healthcare professionals serving the Chinese community. We do have Sandy Stokes here. Would you please stand up? Who is the founder of this organization and has done a lot of great work for our community. So if you are interested, I'm going, December 5th in the afternoon, and we'll have a wonderful panel, at that event. And so you can see her after we finish our talk today.
Can I just have a half a minute?
Okay.
Just 30 seconds. I just want to say I'm very glad I came from Sacramento. Today I find out what our topic is about communication. Everything to do with relationship and communication. And this event will be all about communication with ourselves, about end of life, death and dying, which nobody can avoid, right? And end of life conversation about us and with our loved one. So hope to see you all. Thank you.
And so at this point, after you've been sitting for so long, you do have some rewards. We have wonderful refreshment over there, so please help yourself. And now we conclude our session today. Thank you so much.